And good morning. How's everyone doing today? It's great to see you. Uh-oh. What in the world is going on with my camera? There we go. Hope everybody's doing well today. Hold on just a second. Let me fix my cameras. Get a little more light on the situation. There we go. That seems to be a little bit better. How's everybody doing today? Morning, April. Morning, Amber. Morning, John. Holy cow, I've got the three musketeers. I wonder if we have Yanan in the audience this morning. Good to hear that, Amber. Fantastic. Hope the kids are doing, hope the daughter is doing well, I should say. She got a lot of stuff going on at Carolina this week. Usually Thanksgiving week's pretty quiet at the Hill. Okay. So, today we're going to be talking a little bit about personality. We're going to finish up the personality lecture. So, if you'll remember, yesterday I talked about the self, um, what it is, how we can think of it as a schema, the fact that people are motivated to maintain a positive sense of self. And then I talked about a couple of theories that described how the self might develop in people. Today, we're just going to talk about measuring aspects of the self or measuring personality. I'm going to introduce the trait approach. We're going to talk about Hans Eysenck's biological trait theory. I'm going to talk about the Big Five personality trait theory. And then I'm going to talk about the difference between self-report tests and projective personality tests and provide you an example of a projective personality test. Yep, Amber, you're right. She's coming home this evening. Wednesday is no class day at Carolina. Most of the teachers canceled their class, at least most of the people in the psych department. Everybody wanted to get out of town just a little bit early. That's funny. Fantastic. All right. So, how many of you have ever taken a personality test? How many of you, well, actually, all of you took the personality test for this class last week. We were going to discuss it in class. Was anyone surprised by their personality test last week? I have to admit, I was kind of surprised. In fact, hold on. Did you find your test results to be surprising? Let's go ahead and get a survey going in the bar there. I don't know if anybody can see that. I didn't take the Big Five personality test until I was 35 years old. In fact, I was sitting in this very room right here taking the personality test. This was probably, God, 17 years ago. And I remember taking the test and laughing. I turned to my wife and I said, I can't believe this. The test says I have a neurotic personality. And I started laughing. I'm like, can you believe this test would actually say that? This test is so wrong. And my wife looked at me, she laughed, and she said, that test is completely right. And I began to look at myself a little more closely, and I realized that, you know what, I am a neurotic personality. I get anxious and I get angry very easily. And so that test measured a part of my personality that I wasn't even really aware of. I'm wondering if anybody out there, any of you three, had that experience when you had your personality measured last week. It was for me a very surprising thing. So this week we're going to talk about measuring this thing called personality. Okay. Now, the first person to really talk about measuring personality tests, the person who introduced uh, the trait approach, was a fellow named Gordon. Was that led to the development of personality testing was a fellow named Gordon Allport, and he sort of instigated what's known as the trait approach. And the trait approach is a method of studying personality that is interested in describing what personality looks like. People from the trait approach are interested in creating tools. A personality test is a measurement tool that measures individual differences. And his approach asks three questions. How is everyone similar to each other? How are some people like you? And how are you completely unique? How are people how is no one like you? And so he asked this question. Now, the subfield of psychology that's going to be interested in developing personality tests are called personality psychologists. They're the ones who come up with theories and say, you know what, I think personality looks like this. And they'll develop new tests that they think measure personality. And they're going to work very closely with quantitative psychologists. And quantitative psychologists are sometimes called psychometricians, and those people are the ones that use statistical tools to help make sure that those tests measure you as accurately as possible. Okay, now it turns out that personality tests are used in clinical settings, they're used in school settings, they're used in court settings. So it is very important that these tests measure people's personality as accurately as possible. And quantitative psychologists are the ones who are experts in the use of statistical tools that help personality psychologists evaluate these tests and make sure that these tests are as accurately as possible. Okay, now I'm looking at my poll here, and it looks like none of you were surprised by your personality test. I guess it was just me. Oh well. Now, Gordon Allport was the father of the trait approach. He started by looking in the dictionary. If you think about it, how do we describe people's personality? We describe people's personality with words. And he found over 4,500 words in the American language that could be used to describe people's personality. There's kind, there's nice, there's friendly, there's angry, there's pugnacious, there's persnickety, there's cantankerous. There's all kinds of words that are used to describe people's personality. And Gordon Allport thought that you could think about three types of traits. He thought that some people had these things called cardinal traits. Now, not everybody has a cardinal trait. These are the traits that make you so unique and different from everybody else that you stand out, right? So when we think about Mother Teresa, the famous Mother Teresa, we think about kindness, right? When we think about Michael Jordan, the basketball player, we think about super duper competitiveness. Do you have a trait that makes you so unique, that describes a part of your personality that just overwhelms every other part of your personality? If you do, then you have a cardinal trait. But not everybody has a cardinal trait. Um, Cardinal traits are very unique, and they're sort of something that sort of bleeds through every different part of your personality. On the other hand, most personality traits measure these things we'll call central traits. And central traits are just general traits that everyone has to some degree. All of us are extroverted to some degree. All of us are agreeableness to some degree. All of us are conscientious to some degree. All of us have warmness to some degree or coldness to some degree. And then he described that we should think about a third set of traits called peripheral traits. And these are more limited personality traits that we only demonstrate situationally, right? So maybe you're an honest person, but you happen to cheat at board games, okay? So you're a cheater in this small context. And so he started the thinking about personality traits by trying to figure out if we could come up with a hierarchy of traits. We had cardinal traits that only some people show, but they bleed through every part of their life. Then all of us have a set of general traits or central traits that we all exhibit to a certain degree. And then he argued that there are peripheral traits that that all of us show off in certain situations. Good morning, Allison. It is good to see you. We're talking a little bit about personality traits, and this guy, Gordon Allport, is the father of the trait approach. He started the study of personality, and he suggested that we could think about three different sort of categories of traits. Now, let's talk about uh, uh, modern personality testing. Now, there are two ways to develop a personality test. The first is to develop a theory and then make a test to develop to measure your theory of personality, and that's called a theory-driven test. And the other way to do it is just to start measuring people's personality, look at the results and see if you can figure out what personality must look like from the data. That's a data-driven test. All right. So let's start by talking about a theory-driven test. So in a theory-driven test, you start from a theory, an explanation of personality. Then you create a test to measure the constructs in the theory. A good example of that's provided in your textbook. It's Hans Eysenk's personality theory. It's called the biological trait theory. And this was based on early research into temperament. So when you take developmental psychology, they're going to talk about temperament as being probably the forerunner of the personality that you will see in children as young as 3 or 4 days old. Children differ and whether or not their emotional functioning is stable or unstable. Some infants cry a lot, and other infants don't cry that much. We'll think of that as sort of emotional instability. And this quality that you'll see at 4 days of age actually follows people into adulthood. So the babies that cry a lot at 3 or 4 days of age are going to be tend to be the people that get angry at 35 40 really easily, or get upset really easy at 30 or 40. Another quality that you're going to see in infants very early on that persists into adulthood is whether or not they like new things, how good they are with novelty. And what you're going to find is some babies are exploratory and are very interested in their environment, and other babies tend to be withdrawn. And this personality trait is going to develop into introversion and extroversion that you will see later on in life. And so psychologists a long time ago realized that babies differ along these two dimensions: their emotional stability and their interest in exploring the world. And so Hans Eysenck thought that this must relate to some sort of biological structures in the brain. And so he developed his personality test to measure extroversion and emotional stability, or neuroticism. All right. Now, he developed a personality test and began measuring these qualities. Now, if you look at this wheel underneath me, you'll see that you can sort of put all of these different personality traits in a wheel described by these two personality qualities. So people who are easygoing, you can think of them as extroverted and stable in personality style. You can think about people who are restless as being emotionally unstable but also extroverted. You can think about people who are described uh, as reliable as being introverted and stable in their personality style. And he developed the his personality test and began measuring people's personality. Now, the problem with a theory driven test is sometimes your theory has to evolve. And then what does that do to the test that you've developed that is built on the incomplete version of the theory? And this is what happened to Hans Eysenck. People said, "Wow, Hans, your test and your theory is very good. It makes good sense, but you're leaving out a personality style. How do we explain some people who break the law and seem to be psychopathic? Because I don't see psychopaths measured anywhere on your test." And so he actually had to go back and revise his test to incorporate a new theoretical part to his model, which he called constraint. Some people have a high constraint, that is, they are able to control their impulses, and other people have low constraint. They are unable to control or unwilling to control their impulses. And so he had to come with a third part of his personality test called psychoticism. Psychoticism. And you can see that dotted line being drawn through the through this model. And so Hans Eysenck's biological trait theory was a personality test developed based upon a theory. Now, if you think about biological psychology, when we talked about stress, when we talked about emotions, there are actually brain parts that you can pin his theory to. So we didn't really talk about this, but in your brainstem, going from your pons up to your midbrain around your thalamus, is a set of neurons, neural connections we call the reticular activating system. It's a collection of nuclei located in the brainstem that maintain arousal. Now, some people have a higher level of reticular activating system activity. That is, their RAS is set at a higher level. So these people are already, in a sense, getting this stimulation that they need. On the other hand, some people have a lower level of RAS, and so for them, they need more stimulation to maintain that optimal arousal. Remember, we talked about optimal arousal um, uh, and motivation and emotion the other day. And so, if you think about it, we can say that the personality difference between introverts and extroverts can be traced to an actual part in your brain. Introverts have a more active reticular activating system, so they don't like as much stimulation. More stimulation causes them to be too aroused. On the other hand, those of you who are extroverts out there, we can say you probably don't have as much activity in your reticular activating system, and so you seek out stimulation in order to create the optimal level of arousal. And so we can actually trace personality traits back to parts of your brain. And so if you think about it, a theory driven test, a test that is based upon beliefs about how the brain works, is a pretty neat way to create a personality test. So that's one method for developing a personality test, the theory driven approach. However, the test that you took in my class was based on a data driven approach. It's called the Big Five Personality Inventory. And in a data driven test, what you do is you give people a test that you make up with a ton of questions, and then you look at the test questions and see if you can figure out how people differ based upon the way they answer the questions. So think about it. We've got 400, 4,500 different words that describe people's personality styles. What you could do is you could give people a list, a sheet of paper with all of those 4,500 words, and you could have them circle the words that they feel describe their personality. And if you do that, you can then look at the patterns of how people select these personality tests, these personality descriptors, and you can begin to ask the question: are there any patterns which suggest different personality styles? So you let the data tell you what personality looks like. So in the theory-driven test, you have a theory and you develop the test to explain the theory. In the data-driven approach, you develop the test and then build your theory around the results of the test. Now, the Big Five is a data-driven personality test. Excuse me. Achoo! 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 Hey, excuse me. That's 4 sneezes. I'm usually a 3 sneeze kind of guy. Now, there's a specific statistical technique that you can use to develop these tests, and this is known as the factor analysis. And this is a statistical testing technique that's often called cluster analysis. And what factor analysis or cluster analysis does is it allows you to look at those clusters of variables that people pick, personality descriptors, and statistically decide how many different personality traits you have. And if you interpreted these clusters like McCrae and Costa did, they suggested you can think about personality as having 5 different categories, right? And so the test that you've seen was developed using this statistical testing technique, and they took these items and then created the test after they did the data analysis. And it turns out that there are 5 broad clusters as identified by McCrae and Costa. And so they say if you really want to measure people, you need to look at these uh, what we'll call central traits. Remember central traits from uh, from the first slide of this chapter of this lecture. So people differ in the degree to which they like novelty, new things, and interesting new ideas, and that's called openness to experience. The opposite of openness to experience would be conventional. Those people that like things the way they are versus those people who like novelty. Conscientiousness is the degree to which you like to maintain control. Control over your work, control over your environment. Are you a clean person? Are you a sloppy person? Do you do things on time? Are you always late? Conscientiousness sort of measures your degree of self control, if you will. Extroversion is the degree to which you like stimulation from other people and from activities. So some people are extroverted, some people are introverted. Agreeableness is the degree to which you will let somebody else have their way in order to avoid a fight. Some of you are agreeable, some of us are disagreeable, right? And then neuroticism is the degree to which you suffer negative emotions like anxiety and anger. Some people have very stable personalities and are very emotionally stable. My wife, I like to call her unflappable because nothing really gets her mad and nothing really gets her super, super happy. On the other hand, I go up and down with the wind. I am very emotionally unstable or neurotic as it goes. All right. So these are 5, if you will, clusters of personality. Now, when you took this test, you'll notice that you were given a score somewhere between 0 and 99. Now, this test is normed just like an IQ test, and 50 means you are exactly in the middle of the distribution. To the degree that your score was higher than 50, you are extroverted, you are open to experience, you are conscientious, you are agreeable, you are neurotic. To the degree that your score was below 50, you were more conventional, less conscientious, more introverted, less agreeable, and more emotionally stable. All right. So for me, my openness to experience was an 80. I love new things. My conscientiousness was about a 50. My extroversion was a 57. I was a little more extroverted, but most of that is due to my being a teacher. My agreeableness was a 40. I'm kind of a stubborn person. And my neuroticism was 75. I'm a very emotional person and I lose my temper and get nervous very easily compared to other people. Now, you'll notice when you took that test, they asked you your country of origin, and they asked you your age, and they also asked you your gender because they were comparing you to similar others, just like we do with an IQ test. So the fact that I'm neurotic means I'm neurotic compared to other 52-year-old men. The fact that I'm open to experience is comparing me to other 52-year-old American men. And so the question is, what was your personality style compared to other people? Hi, Yanan. I'm glad you made it today. How many of you scored neurotic? If you scored neurotic, type in the chat bar. What was your neuroticism score? Was it above 50? Was it below 50? What was your openness to experience? Was it above 50 or was it below 50? I'm going to carry on the lecture, but then I'm hopefully some of you will type in the chat bar and I can find out what your personality style was like. I already have my guesses. I have my guesses. So, for example, Amber, Amber, I'm probably going to say your openness to experience was maybe a little bit below 50. You look kind of like a conventional person. Uh, AK, you know what? I was going to suggest that you are extroverted or emotional. Okay, I would have figured that, April. Maybe a little bit neurotic. That's okay. Me too. We're two peas in a pod, right? Now, the cool thing is, it's great that I married my wife who is low on neuroticism because if two neurotic people get together, then you're going to get fireworks in that relationship. So, April, if you and I were roommates, we would probably fight all of the time, right? And so it's kind of cool sometimes to have somebody who matches your personality, has a complementary personality in a way. Now, the neat thing with this Big Five is it's become so popular. I was a little shocked with openness to experience. I love traveling and learning new things. But you got a one. Hmm, that's interesting. You know, one of the is that uh, people, especially parents, spend so much time dealing with the kids and stuff that they don't. The test sort of measures your emotional and your artistic openness to experience to a certain degree, April, and you probably scored high on extroversion, April. Um, Traveling maybe is an extroverted kind of thing. Um, but some people who have a busy life don't have time for new ideas as much. Well, take the test, Amber. I'd be curious to find out what your personality scores is. That is interesting, April, because you do seem like a very intellectually interested person. If you scored high on the intellectual subscale, that just means that you're sort of an analytical, overthinking kind of person. My intellectual score on openness to experience was a 99. I'm one of those people that always has to know why we're doing this. Explain to me why we're taking this route instead of another route to the to the store. Explain to me why we have to do it this way and not this way. I'm overly analytical sometimes. Now, actually, before we talk about this, I should note that if you took the personality test, April, Amber, you'll notice that it gave you 5 cluster scores, your big five scores. But within each of those big five scores, you'll notice that you had sub scores as well. Now, this test was based on a statistical analysis and factor analysis. And what we know from factor analysis is sometimes people hold together in a factor and sometimes people's scores don't hold together in a factor. So I was clearly neurotic. My score was high enough, and all of my scores were above 50 that you could clearly say I am a neurotic person. On the other hand, you may have had a personality score. So for me, my extroversion, some of my items were above 50 and some of my items were below 50. So it wouldn't be totally accurate to describe me as an extroverted person. All right? And so the sub scores allow you to analyze people who are not clearly one personality style or another. So if you looked at my personality score, what you would find is that when it comes to activities and energy, I'm a very extroverted person. When it comes to social situations, I am a rather introverted person. So these subscores allow you to understand when it's appropriate to give someone a label, like me, neuroticism, or me, openness to experience, or when it's more appropriate to describe someone in a more nuanced fashion. So you wouldn't necessarily call me an extrovert. You would say I have some extroverted qualities and some introverted qualities. And the neat thing with the big five compared to like the Eysenck personality test or some of your theory driven personality tests is that the data driven test shows you when it's appropriate to give someone a category label and when it's not appropriate to give someone a category label. Okay? Now, just the Big Five test has become so popular. In fact, it is the most popular personality test out there, and you're going to get it everywhere you go. People are going to use the Big Five test. Now, some of you may have taken the MBTI. Anybody ever heard of the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator test? That test is not as popular anymore. Oh, and another note with the MBTI, it gives you a personality type. So I think I'm an INFP. It puts me in that category. It says that's who I am. But you know what? As I suggested to you, I may not be every part of an INFP, but it doesn't allow me that statistical ambiguity like the Big Five does. Now, the MBTI used to be the most popular personality test, but now it's the Big Five. That's what you're going to find in clinical settings. Now, because it's so popular, people have tried to figure out if they can use it to ask the question, is there a genetic component to personality? And you know what? Behavioral genetics, which is where you give people, where you try to discover the genetic qualities of human, the genetic degree of human qualities, has been used to evaluate personality. If you remember from chapter 8, when we talked about IQ testing, I suggested to you that IQ has a genetic component because people of similar genetic similarity tend to have similar IQ scores. You know what? Twin studies and adoption studies have shown the same thing about personality styles as measured by the Big Five personality test. So, if you look at the chart over here on the other side, you'll notice that we have a behavioral genetics study that compares people who are identical twins and who are fraternal twins. Remember, identical twins share 100% have 100% genetic similarity, and fraternal twins, that is just regular brothers and sisters, only have 25% genetic similarity. The green bars represent the correlations of scores for identical twins, and the orange bars represent the correlations of scores for fraternal twins. And what you're going to notice for each of the five personality traits, the correlation between identical twin scores are much higher than the correlation between fraternal twins. So, yes, there is a genetic component to personality. Some of it's environment, but a lot of it's going to be your genes. So, if you look at the statements right here, identical twins are more similar than fraternal twins on Big Five traits. Here's a really cool thing, though. I want you to think about this for a moment. Identical twins raised apart, that are brought up in different homes, maybe they're separated because they had to go into foster homes and they were then adopted by different parents. So identical twins raised apart are more similar than identical twins that are raised together. And here's another interesting fact about identical twins. Identical twins are more similar when they are adults than they are as children. Can anybody guess why identical twins that don't live together tend to have similar personality styles than identical twins who happen to be in the same house? Does anybody have a theory why that might be the case? I'm going to talk about adoption studies real quick, and then I'll come back and answer that question. I'm going to give you time to come up with a theory about why that might be true. Okay. Now, we've also done adoption studies where you measure the personality of children who are reared in the same home but don't have any genetic similarities. So we adopted this kid when he was 1 year of age, and then we also had two other children. And so we raised them all in the same house. And we're going to see whether or not being raised by the same parents caused them to have the same personality, right? And what you're going to find is that non genetically related siblings, that is, adopted children, show absolutely no correlation in personality traits. And adopted children show no correlation with parents on personality traits. So, you know what? It's not the environment. So, these adoption studies suggest that the environment, how you raise your children, really isn't that impactful on their final personality development. Look at that. Allison Asfari, you are absolutely spot on, perfectly correct. She says because twins living together try to be a little bit different. Absolutely, there is a family dynamic. And you know what? Usually, identical twins, their parents probably buy them the same clothes, so they both have the little red outfit. I remember I knew a set of identical twins in middle school, and their names were Kenny and Denny. I mean, really, Kenny and Denny. And so their names kind of sounded alike, they looked alike, they dressed alike. And so inside that family dynamic, these kids tried to establish their own identity by being a little bit different. Once you grow up and move out of the house, there's not that pressure anymore, and that personality kind of comes back to its natural setting. Allison, wow, you are brilliant, my dear. Absolutely brilliant today. Thank you very much for figuring that out. A gold star for you. If I could give you, in fact, goodness me, how about this? A round, oh, wait a minute, hold on. A round of applause for Allison Asfari. She is perfectly correct. Good job. Okay. Now, another question that we have, besides whether or not personality is genetic, is how our personality changes as we get older. And here's a weird thing. As we get older, our personality changes. But because everybody's personality changes in the same way, relative to other people, your personality, your age, your personality doesn't change. So does personality change as we get older? Yes and no. It does change, but everybody you know that you are compared to's personality changes in the same way. And so, in a sense, relatively speaking, our personality doesn't change. So, as we get older, look at these personality styles. What you're going to notice is that as we get older, we become more conscientious people in an absolute sense. So look at this comparison of people in different age groups, 14 to 18 to 22 to 30 to 50, and look at this in three different cultures, German, British, and Czech people. What you're going to notice is that everyone becomes more conscientious as they get older, as they get older. Okay? However, compared to your peer group, our personality remains particularly consistent, especially starting in our late teens. So, what you're going to see in this chart right here, they talk about the consistency of personality, and you're going to see that for little kids, personality is kind of all over the place. But as we get a little bit older, our personality becomes much, much more consistent. All right. And so here's what I'm going to suggest to you. Starting in your late teens, your personality kind of becomes set, and really it doesn't change compared to your peer group. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but personality disorders, we're going to talk about psychological disorders next week. You cannot actually be diagnosed as having a personality disorder until you reach your 18th birthday. Before you reach your 18th birthday, you cannot be diagnosed as having a personality disorder because personality is still fluctuating and is not set until your late teenage years. Hey, Ronique, good to see you. Thanks for the kind words in the text yesterday. I hope you got to see the lecture. We're talking a little bit about personality styles. Now, I do want to mention one different kind of personality test called a projective personality test. Now, you folks took the Big Five last week. Um, that's what's known as a self-report test of personality. And in a self-report test of personality, or what's sometimes called an objective test of personality, um, you are asked to tell the test evaluator what your personality is like. And Allison brings a good, she says, I was thinking that when you're young, ideas and opinions are all over the place. Absolutely. I don't know about you, but in ninth grade, I was an absolute nut job. One day I was super extroverted, the next day I was super introverted. One day I was calm, the next day I was emotionally all over the place. Yes, your personality fluctuates a great deal as a child, at least your measured personality does. Now, in a self report test, I give you the questions and directly ask you, do you like being in crowds of people? Yes or no? And you say yes or no. Do you get angry easily? And you say yes or no. I say, do you like to do your homework on time? You say yes or no. In a self report test, I specifically ask you about your personality. That's what's known as a self report personality test. And I'm going to ask you questions like, how do you usually behave? Or how did you behave in the past? How would you behave in this future situation? Or I might even give you a set of adjectives and ask you to circle the adjectives that describe your personality. I'm directly asking you about your personality. Now, the advantages of the self report test is who knows you best, right? You know you best. And so I can quickly and easily measure your personality. And if I ask everybody to tell me about themselves, it's really easy to compare one person with another person. On the other hand, if I ask you directly about your personality, you may not know, really. If I say, well, when you go to a large party, how likely are you to get up in front of other people? You may say, you know what, I've never done that before. I don't know how I would act in that future situation. Or you might say, well, it depends. On the Big Five test you took last week, there were 125 situations you were asked to evaluate yourself in. How many of you said, geez, I don't know how I would act in that situation? Or did any of you say, well, it depends? Sometimes I would say yes to that question, sometimes I would say no. When you ask somebody in a very specific way about a specific situation, they're not exactly sure how they would respond in that situation. And you know what? If you're in a clinical setting, you might be motivated to lie, right? So if you're in a psychiatric institution and I ask you whether or not you are a violent personality, you might lie to me in an attempt to get out of that psychiatric institution. So, although it's great to ask people directly about their personality, there are situations where asking people directly about their personality is not as useful. And Allison has two children at home, so she notices that children's personalities fluctuate all over the place. Yes, Allison, you know exactly how it is with the kids. They can be Jekyll and Hyde sometimes, right? So, because self report tests have these limitations, some people suggest that we ought to use an indirect way to measure personality. And so, what I'll do is I'll use a way of measuring personality where you don't exactly know what I'm looking for. And that allows me to sort of indirectly test your personality and gets around your ability to sort of lie about your situation and puts you in ambiguous enough situations where you can flexibly demonstrate your personality. So a projective test, and this a lot of this starts off with Freud's theory of unconscious motivations, is a personality test in which the test taker responds to an ambiguous stimulus. And the assumption here is that people will project their needs, motives, and conflicts into an ambiguous situation. And you'll see the Rorschach image down here. I actually have a projective personality test that I use the first day of class in my seated classroom experience. What I do is, as new students enter my class, I say hello to each student as they walk in my classroom. Hey, how you doing? And you know what? I noticed that there are three different styles of responses to me. Some people will smile, get a big smile on their face, and they'll say hi. And they may even ask me a question, how are you doing? Or they'll look at me and they'll talk to me a little bit. And these are my really, really extroverted students. On the other hand, some of you, when you walk in the classroom on the first day, if I say, hi, how are you doing? You'll answer me, but I can tell that you are a little bit uncomfortable talking to a new teacher the first day. And you're a little less extroverted than your partners, right? And then some of you, when you walk in the class the first day, I'll say hi, and you'll pretend that you did not hear me at all and walk straight to your seat without making eye contact. You are my introverted students. And then I can further that analysis by looking at you as you sit in your seat waiting for class to start on the first day. You really extroverted students will look up at me and make eye contact and smile, and you may even start a conversation. Those of you who are less extroverted won't necessarily look at me, but you won't look away from me. And if we make eye contact, you'll give me a little smile. And then some of my really introverted students, I can tell you look down the whole time on your phone, just wanting to avoid eye contact at all costs. Now, uh, uh, oh, and Amber's got to go. Take care, Amber. We will see you in a little bit. And so I can tell you are the most introverted students. So even though I haven't asked you directly about your personality, I've measured how you respond to an ambiguous situation. And I can already figure out before I've said the first word, before we've had the first lecture, I can figure out which students in my class are the extroverts and which students are the introverts. I gave you an ambiguous situation, and then I guess your personality based on how you respond to that ambiguous situation. Now, the most famous of all projected personality tests is there's a picture of it right here below me. This is what's known as the Rorschach test or the ink blot test. Anybody ever heard of the Rorschach ink blot test? The Rorschach ink blot test is a test with 10 pictures, ink blots, if you will, some of them black and white and some of them colored. And what the test, the psychologist does is they hand the person the ink blot, and they have the person tell them a story or tell them what they are seeing. So as you look at this ink blot right below me, what do you see? So let's actually go to this right here. Let's see, right here. Can anybody tell me, what do you see here? What does this image look like? What does this image look like? Hmm? Now, you may or may not be surprised to know that when I ask this question, my nursing students, more often than not, will tell me that this looks like a pelvis. A pelvis. Can anyone see a pelvis in this picture? Yes, Allison, that's a very common answer. It looks like a bat. Some people say it looks like a mask. My nursing students say it looks like a pelvis. I wonder why. You know why? Because they've got biology and bones on their mind. So, if you think about it, I can use this to figure out who my nursing students are. Yanan sees a bat as well. Good job. Okay. What do you see with this picture? Oh, that's Herman. Actually, let's go back to this picture. What do y'all think? Does Herman Rorschach, doesn't he look a little bit like a young Brad Pitt? He was a very handsome psychologist. Okay, what do you see right here? This is one of the colored pictures. Does anybody see two bears playing patty cake? Does anybody see a face with a nose and two bloody red eyes? Okay. What about this picture? I see two women stirring a pot of food, right? Does anybody see that? You saw two ladies giving high fives to each other. Good one, Allison. I see that as well. What about this one, Allison? What do you see in this picture? Hmm? Hmm? I'd be curious to see. And what about this picture? I see a guy sitting on a motorcycle coming directly at you. And I see the little handlebars on the side, little things hanging off the handlebars. Two people lifting a heavy object. Yes, that's what I could see in the last picture. What about this one, Allison? What do you think? Okay. So you get the idea. You get the idea. Let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation. Now, the advantages of a projective personality test is since you don't know what the right answer is, it's harder to fool the test. If I don't know what the psychologist wants, then it's harder for me to lie about what it is I see. And more importantly, if I ask you just to describe the situation, you can describe it exactly how you want. On the test, if I say, what would you do in this situation, and say from extremely unlike me to extremely like me, I've sort of constrained how you can respond. You're not as constrained on the big five, on the Rorschach test, because you can tell me whatever you want to tell me. And so the test is more flexible. Now, the disadvantage of this test is sometimes, since I'm the one that's guessing your personality based on your response, if you get two psychologists and they look at your answers, they often don't agree about what your personality style is. So these tests sometimes suffer from low reliability. And there are some people who just think that you're not accurate when you, as a psychologist, are trying to guess somebody's personality. So when you walk into my classroom on the first day and I say hello to you and then try to guess your extroversion based upon how you respond, am I really that accurate? Maybe you're having a bad day. Maybe you just had an argument with your boyfriend, girlfriend, or mother, and you don't feel like talking to anybody. So, how valid is my personality evaluation? Am I accurate? And there are people who question the reliability and the validity of these projective tests of personality. All right. So, what I wanted you to get for them today is that there are a group of people called personality psychologists and quantitative psychologists who work together to create personality tests that measure people's personality styles. Now, we group these different, and what we do is we try to group people's personality based upon these things called personality traits. Cardinal traits, central traits, peripheral traits, I'm not sure, it depends on the test. I suggested to you that we could make tests based on a theory that we might have, or we might make a test and develop the theory afterwards. And then there are two types of tests: tests that ask us directly about our personality, self report tests, and other personality tests where we give you an ambiguous situation and then try to guess your personality based upon how you respond in that situation. All right, we are now at the end of our lecture. Um, this is the last lecture before Thanksgiving. Don't forget to do the course evaluation and send me the your confirmation. I want you to have a great Thanksgiving. Be careful. Don't drink and drive. Um, Eat a bunch of turkey and ham or whatever Thanksgiving food you like to eat. Have a great time. And don't forget to turn your homework in on by Sunday. I've given you till Sunday because I know a lot of you on Thursday and Friday are going to be with family and won't have time to take care of your personality, your test stuff. So just get that in by Sunday. You folks have a great weekend, and I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday as we start talking about psychological disorders. Thanks for coming, April. Thanks for coming, Allison, Renan, Ronique, John. It's good to see each and every one of you. Have a great day, and I will see you after Thanksgiving.